And welcome back to Devlog. Oh no, a spooky goblin. Time to use my magical powers to dispose of it. And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part, I worked on my previous level, this being the aquatic abode. In this part, I work on the additional mechanics needed for my next level, this being the flying factory. The mechanics for this is moving platforms, buttons, on-off switches, lasers, and a secret fourth option. Conveyor belt balls that move mechanical objects in the factory. There's a bunch of weird mechanical parts. You interact with these to progress through the levels. The flying factory has more of a puzzle basis for its levels, while still having more of a platforming focus, but these levels have more of a focus where you actually have to figure out what to do to progress through the levels. As a result of this, I wanted a lot of the mechanics for this level to be a lot more technical and a lot more involved in how they can affect the level. The first of these is the on-off blocks, or the P blocks from Mario, or the one item from the Mario 3D World game at the end of the last level where you had the blocks that turn on and off with the rhythm of the background music, those blocks. The way these work is actually pretty simple, considering I had already made an on-off button for my accessibility buttons. I just repurposed the actual functionality and coding for the on-off function of these, but I'd had these turn the blocks on or off. The way this works is that I have a trigger object for the top of the button, this being the button itself, and if the player is stunned on this, if the player collides with this with a dash attack or a slam attack, or if the player touch this in some other way, like being on the wall and touching it, the button descends. Once the player has removed from this, the button ascends. This is just doing through certain animations, so it's very, very simple. If pressed, button go down. If depressed, button go up. When the button is pressed from any circumstance, either the player or a moving object, because those can also interact with the buttons in the exact same way, the button will toggle its current state of every block it has an interactability with. This is very simple. We have a bool in this button for if it should turn a block on or off. We will then have a list of the blocks it should turn off and a list of the blocks it should turn on. What we do is we check if these blocks should turn on. This is going to run through each of these blocks and turn them on. What this also will do is run through the visuals I have for the blocks being off, because when the blocks are not actually there, I have an outline for the actual visual of the block to indicate a block could be there. So we'll turn all the actual visuals that indicate the block is not there off because they are no longer needed, and turn all the blocks on because they are needed. One interesting detail with this is that I actually have to check that the button's current state it is trying to trigger the blocks into is correct. For example, if I have two of the same buttons in the scene, one of them could turn the blocks off, and then one of them, pressed on a different button, could turn the block on. Because the buttons are just an on-off button, if the blocks could be turned on or turned off by multiple different buttons, the buttons actually have to test what they should be turning on or off if they are correct in doing so. This is very, very simple. If the blocks need to turn blocks on, I will just check if the block is already on. If the block is already on, I will just flip around what this button should do, so it instead is going to turn the buttons off. This is a pretty complicated aspect of the blocks, but realistically a lot of the level designs only accommodate for one or two of the same colored block in a certain chunk of the level, so this isn't really going to come up very often. Another element of the buttons is different colored buttons. In the actual flying factory, there is only two different colored buttons, but in the hard mode, there is a third colored button, these being yellow, purple, and green. The yellow buttons will turn on yellow buttons, the purple buttons will turn on purple blocks, green buttons will turn on green blocks. This is very simple. I just have each of the actual blocks that should be turned on or off have a different tag, which the buttons will find when being created to trigger what buttons they should turn on or off. Finally, the buttons have to actually find the objects that they should be enabling or disabling, these being the buttons they are turning on or off. This is pretty simple. I just have tags for on or off and then a number depending on the actual color the button should turn on or off, so purple being 0, yellow being 1, green being 2. The buttons, depending on whatever their color is, I will have an index for this, and then upon starting I will find every single object with a tag of on plus this number, so on 1, on every single button of off plus this number, so off 2. I add all these to a list, and then when enabling or disabling things, I just reference this list, so I don't have to continuously find every single button that should be enabled or disabled when this button is pressed. I can just find it once and then reference this list. Finally, I have the actual button's interactivity with other buttons. The issue with this is that I originally wanted the buttons to affect every single block in the actual stage, but since Pep-Pel has very long stages, maybe too long, the issue with this is that I would have to make it so buttons in certain sections of levels would have to be turned on and then turned off when progressing to another section of the level, because then that would mean the buttons would have to enter a default state when going to another actual chunk of the level, and making it so you couldn't have an impassable section, because one section of the level maybe had you turn buttons off, and then the next section of the level requires those buttons to be on to actually progress through that section of the level. It made actually designing around the buttons incredibly difficult, and also with the fact that the player can respawn into any checkpoint or start from any checkpoint meant that there was an incredibly inconsistent necessity for each of these buttons to be on or off. Some levels would have to require the buttons to start from an on state, some levels would have to require the buttons to start from an off state, and this was pretty impossible to do for every single section of the level for obvious reasons. The buttons cannot be simultaneously on or off. One fix I could have done for this is just making it so that, depending on the chunk you respawn into or start into, the buttons would enter a state. So even if the player dies or loads from the level from a specific chunk where the buttons have to be in a specific state, the game would be able to read and tell what these states should be and then toggle the buttons on or off respectively. But that's hard and I didn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. That's really hard and I don't want to do that. I didn't want to do that at all. So what I actually did is just made the actual buttons separate depending on the chunks. So buttons are only going to affect the blocks that are inside of their current chunk the player is in. This is not really a problem at all, because level designs are supposed to be self-contained within the actual chunks, and there really is no necessity for buttons to interact with the blocks of other chunks, because those are in a different section of the level and way too far away to have any use for. So this was not a problem at all. It was very, very simple. When searching for actual blocks, I will only search for blocks within the same chunk. The way I do this is just finding blocks that have the same parent as the current button, because the blocks and buttons are parented to the actual chunk, so I just had to search for game objects that are a child of this actual chunk, instead of just searching for game objects within the entire scene. This way I can design actual level sections to have any amount of influence on blocks or starting positions. The actual reasoning for making this design, I was originally going to design a very convoluted level system where blocks would have to be pressed in a specific way depending on your chunk, but then I designed one level where a moving object is going to be pressing a button back and forth and make it so the blocks turn on or off on a timer. The issue with this, obviously, is that the on-off state of each of these blocks is going to be inconsistent upon leaving this section of the level. So, very obviously, this presents a problem when influencing the blocks in every other section of the game. Because if the buttons of this section of the level are being turned on or off by a timer, if the blocks are actually going to be affected by the buttons in every section of the level, this would mean that the buttons in every single point of the level would also be turned on or off with a timer. And this is very obviously not good, because certain parts of the level depending on blocks and buttons being pressed in specific manners. So obviously this one funny level design made me have to rethink the way I designed the buttons in general, and I'm glad it did. Anyway, I'm done talking about P-switches and blocks now, so I'm now going to talk about the conveyor belt movement mechanic, and then the laser mechanic, and then the other mechanics in the Flying Factory level, except I'm not, because I don't really feel like it. Instead of doing that, I am in fact going to make a different video about that, and at this current point, I'm going to go out into my back garden, and I'm going to place both of my arms out to my side, and I'm going to run around very quickly and pretend like I am a bird.